3 days had passed since the incident, and Ambassador Kreshna still refused to leave the human ship. The Velkrun leader sat in the conference room of the Starlight Herald, her massive form taking up 2 chairs, while her cubs slept peacefully in the corner. The problem was simple but unprecedented. Her children would only sleep if Sergeant Daniel Cooper was present. Captain Lisa Green paced at the front of the room, trying to maintain diplomatic composure. 6 other alien ambassadors had arrived, within the past 2 days, all from predator species, all demanding to understand what had happened. The Galactic Council was sending messages every few hours, each one more urgent than the last. Nobody could understand why the most dangerous juvenile creatures in the known galaxy had chosen a human as their sleeping companion. Daniel sat uncomfortably in his chair, aware that every eye in the room was on him. He was just a regular soldier, trained for security and basic diplomacy, not for this kind of attention. The cubs, Scar and Tyra, had been curled against him for 3 hours during the afternoon nap time. Even now, though they slept in the corner, they would wake every 30 minutes to check if he was still in the room. Dr. Kevin Hayes stood near the window, reviewing data on his tablet. He had spent the last 3 days running every medical test he could think of on Daniel. Blood samples, genetic markers, pheromone analysis, brain scans. The results showed nothing unusual. Daniel was completely average by human standards. There was no special chemical signature, no unique biological trait that would explain the cub's behavior. "This makes no sense," the Kralix ambassador hissed through his translator. The insect-like creature clicked his mandibles in frustration. "Our young are bred for aggression. They attack their own siblings. Yet you show me recordings of them approaching this human with curiosity instead of hunger." Ambassador Kreshna turned her large head toward the Kralix representative. Her yellow eyes reflected the light as she spoke in her deep, rumbling voice. "I have raised 15 litters in my lifetime. I have never seen my cubs react to anyone this way, not even to their own father. They treat this human as if he were pack." Captain Green stopped pacing and faced the assembled aliens. "We're as confused as you are. Sergeant Cooper has no special training with animals or children. Before this incident, he had never even seen a Velkrun cub. Yet somehow, when your children wandered into our recreation room and found him sleeping, they decided he was safe." Daniel finally spoke up, his voice quiet but steady. "I didn't do anything special. I just woke up and they were there. I stayed calm because I was trained not to make sudden moves around unknown species. They sniffed me, climbed on me, and fell asleep. That's all that happened." The Thornback ambassador, a reptilian creature covered in sharp ridges, leaned forward with interest. "You stayed calm while 2 Velkrun cubs approached you. Most species would have panicked. Fear produces a scent. Did you not feel afraid?" Daniel considered the question honestly. "I was concerned, sure. But fear seemed like it would make things worse. So I just breathed slowly and stayed still. They seemed curious, not aggressive." Dr. Hayes looked up from his tablet, excitement in his eyes. "That might be significant. Most species have a strong fear response that produces specific chemical signals. Humans can consciously control their fear response better than most species we've studied. It's part of our pursuit predator heritage. We're built to stay calm during long hunts." Ambassador Kreshna made a sound that her translator rendered as thoughtful agreement. "My cubs are trained from birth to identify prey by fear scent. Prey runs, prey panics, prey is food. But this human did not register as prey. He was calm. Present. What would you call that?" "Confident," Captain Green suggested. "Humans often project confidence even in uncertain situations. It's a survival trait." The Kralix ambassador clicked rapidly, which Daniel had learned meant he was thinking hard. "This changes things. If humans can interact with predator young without triggering hunting instincts, this could be valuable. Very valuable." Daniel didn't like the way the ambassador said valuable. It sounded like he was talking about a resource rather than a person. Captain Green seemed to pick up on it too, because her expression hardened slightly. "Let's be clear," the captain said firmly. "Sergeant Cooper is a member of my crew, not a commodity. Whatever is happening here is being studied, but we won't be offering his services to the highest bidder. Ambassador Kreshna stood, her full height impressive even in the large conference room. No one is suggesting that, Captain, but you must understand what this means. Predator species have high infant mortality. Our young are dangerous to each other and to us. We must raise them in harsh conditions to prepare them for life. But if humans can provide calming influence during development, it could change everything. Daniel felt the weight of those words. He looked over at Scar and Tyra, still sleeping peacefully. They looked almost cute when they weren't awake and showing their teeth. He had started to feel protective of them over the past few days, which was strange considering they could probably kill him if they wanted to. What happens now? Daniel asked, directing his question at Captain Green. The captain sighed and sat down at the table. The Galactic Council wants us to travel to Velcros Prime, the Velcron homeworld. They want to conduct formal testing in controlled conditions. They need to know if this was a one-time occurrence, or if it's something that can be repeated with other humans and other predator species. And if I refuse? Daniel asked, though he already knew he wouldn't. Then we miss an opportunity to understand something important, Dr. Hayes said. Not just for humanity, but for every predator species in the galaxy. This could be the key to better relations between humans and species that have traditionally been considered dangerous. Ambassador Kreshna approached Daniel's chair, moving slowly so as not to wake her cubs. She looked down at him with those intense yellow eyes. I will make you a promise, human. If you come to my world and help us understand this gift, I will ensure your safety personally. You have shown kindness to my children. That is a debt the Velcron do not take lightly. Daniel looked around the room at all the alien faces watching him. He thought about his simple life before this, running security patrols and doing equipment checks. Now he was at the center of something much bigger. He glanced at the sleeping cubs one more time and made his decision. All right, he said, I'll go to Velcros Prime. But I'm not making any promises about what will happen. I still don't understand why your cubs like me. Captain Green smiled slightly. None of us do, Sergeant. That's what we're going to find out. As the meeting ended and the ambassadors filed out, Daniel stayed behind with Dr. Hayes. The doctor sat down next to him and spoke quietly. Are you sure about this? Velcros Prime is one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. Everything there has evolved to kill. Daniel nodded slowly. I'm sure. Besides, if I don't go, those two won't sleep properly. I can't do that to them. Dr. Hayes laughed softly. You know they're apex predators, right? They'll grow up to be killing machines. Maybe, Daniel said, watching Scar yawn in his sleep, showing rows of sharp teeth. But right now they're just kids who need someone to make them feel safe. I can do that much. The doctor patted his shoulder and stood up. Then I hope you're ready for the biggest adventure of your life, Sergeant. Because tomorrow we leave for the Predator homeworld. The transport ship descended through the thick atmosphere of Velcros Prime, and Daniel pressed his face against the window to see the planet below. Everything looked hostile. The forests were deep purple and black, the trees covered in thorns that gleamed like metal. Rivers cut through the landscape like silver scars, and even from this height, Daniel could see large creatures moving through the clearings. Lieutenant Jack Morrison sat across from him, checking his equipment for the 10th time. Jack was Daniel's commanding officer and had volunteered to accompany him on this mission. Next to Jack sat Dr. Amy Chen and Greg Patterson, two scientists who had been studying the cubs aboard the Starlight Herald. They all looked nervous, which Daniel found oddly comforting. At least he wasn't the only one worried about visiting a death world. Final approach in 5 minutes, the pilot announced through the intercom. Welcome to Velcros Prime, where everything wants to eat you. That's not helping, Amy muttered, gripping her armrests tighter. Ambassador Kreshna moved down the aisle from the front of the ship, her heavy footsteps making the floor vibrate. Scar and Tyra followed behind her, now comfortable enough to walk around without staying glued to Daniel's side. The 3 days of travel had helped them adjust, though they still slept in his cabin every night. We will land at the central testing facility, Krishina explained. It is the safest location on the planet, with multiple security barriers and containment systems. The Council of Predator Nations has gathered juvenile specimens from 12 different species for the testing. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. 12 species? I thought we were just working with Velcron cubs. The council wants comprehensive data, Greg said, not looking up from his tablet. If this is really about something humans do naturally, it should work across multiple predator species. If it only works with Velcrons, then it might be something specific to their biology. The ship touched down with a heavy thud, and the landing ramp began to lower. The air that rushed in was hot and smelled like metal, and something organic that Daniel couldn't identify. As they walked down the ramp, Daniel got his first real look at Velcros Prime. The facility was a massive complex of buildings made from dark stone and reinforced metal. Armed Velcron guards stood at every entrance, their weapons looking both advanced and brutal. The sky above was a strange orange color, and Daniel could hear howling sounds in the distance. Everything about this place screamed danger. A group of Velcron scientists waited near the facility entrance. The lead scientist, who introduced himself as researcher Vexal, approached with what Daniel had learned was a Velcron greeting, a slight bow and a show of teeth that wasn't quite a smile. "Sergeant Cooper," Vexal said through his translator device, "we have been preparing for your arrival. The testing chambers are ready. We will begin with the least dangerous species in progress based on results." They were led through several security checkpoints, each one requiring biometric scans and armed escorts. The facility interior was clean and sterile, reminding Daniel of military research bases back on Earth. But the sounds coming from deeper in the complex were definitely not Earth-like. Roars, screeches, and sounds he had no reference for echoed through the corridors. The first testing chamber was a large room with transparent walls. Inside, 6 small creatures moved around on a sandy floor. They looked like reptiles, but with 6 legs and ridged backs covered in sharp spines. Their scales were dark green and shifted colors slightly as they moved. "Draken hatchlings," Vexel explained. 3 weeks old, normally aggressive to anything that enters their space. They have already killed 2 small prey animals we introduced this morning. Daniel looked at the creatures and felt his heart rate increase. They were the size of large cats, and their mouths had multiple rows of teeth. "You want me to go in there?" "That is the test," Vexal said simply. "We need to see if your presence calms them or if they attack. You will be safe. We have sedation systems that can activate instantly if needed." Jack put a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You don't have to do this. We can tell them the testing is too dangerous." Daniel looked at his commander, then at Amy and Greg, who both looked worried. He thought about backing out, going home and forgetting this whole thing. But then he looked at Scar and Tyra, who sat nearby watching him with their intelligent eyes. They trusted him. "Maybe these hatchlings could too. I'll do it," Daniel said, his voice steadier than he felt. "But I go in alone. No weapons, no protective gear. If this is about them sensing something human, we need to do it naturally." Vexal's eyes widened slightly. "That is brave or foolish." "Possibly both." The chamber door slid open with a hiss and Daniel walked in slowly. The door sealed behind him with a sound that made his heart jump. The 6 Draken hatchlings immediately noticed him and turned in his direction. Their heads lowered and they began to spread out, creating a circle around him. Daniel remembered his training and everything he had learned over the past few days. He sat down slowly on the sandy floor, crossing his legs and placing his hands on his knees. He breathed deeply and evenly, keeping his eyes on the hatchlings but not staring directly at them. That was aggressive behavior in many species. The hatchlings moved closer, hissing softly. Their spines rattled together, making a sound like dry leaves. Daniel kept breathing slowly, in through his nose, out through his mouth. He thought about calm things, about sitting by the lake near his home on Earth, about the feeling of sun on his face. The largest hatchling approached first, moving in a jerky pattern that Daniel recognized as cautious curiosity. It came within a foot of him and raised its head, sniffing the air. Daniel remained perfectly still. The hatchling moved closer, its nostrils flaring as it smelled him. Then slowly, it pressed its scaled head against Daniel's hand. Outside the chamber, Daniel could hear excited voices but couldn't make out words. He stayed focused on the hatchling. Its scales were warm and rough under his palm. He moved his hand very gently, just a small stroke along its head. The hatchling made a sound, softer than the hiss from before, almost like a purr. The other 5 hatchlings moved in closer now, their aggressive posture changing to something more curious. One climbed onto Daniel's leg. Another pressed against his side. Within minutes, all 6 Draken hatchlings were gathered around him, touching him, smelling him, but showing no signs of aggression. Daniel sat there for nearly an hour while the scientists took recordings and measurements from outside the chamber. The hatchlings eventually settled down, 2 of them falling asleep against his legs. When Vexal finally opened the chamber door, Daniel stood slowly and walked out, leaving the hatchlings behind. The research team was buzzing with excitement. Amy had tears in her eyes. Jack looked relieved and amazed at the same time. Even the Velcron scientists were making excited gestures and talking rapidly in their own language. Impossible, Vexal said, but he was clearly pleased. Draken hatchlings have never shown that behavior with any species outside their own kind. Yet they treated you as if you were their clutchmate. Daniel leaned against the wall, feeling exhausted. What's next? Vexal pulled up a holographic display showing different creatures. We have 11 more species to test. If the results continue like this, we will need to completely revise our understanding of predator behavior. Jack stepped forward. How many tests today? We should do at least 3, Vexal said. We have the facility for the entire week. Daniel looked at the holographic displays showing various dangerous creatures. He thought about what Amy had discovered in her research, about how humans might not trigger the normal prey response. He thought about Scar and Tyra choosing to sleep on his chest. And he thought about the Draken hatchlings, deadly little creatures that had treated him with gentleness. Let's keep going, Daniel said. If we're going to understand this, we need data. Lots of it. As they prepared for the next test, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was shifting, not just for him, but for humanity's place in the galaxy. These predator species had always been seen as dangerous, as threats to avoid. But maybe, just maybe, humans had a different role to play. The next chamber was prepared, this time with a species called thornbacks. Daniel took a deep breath and walked toward the door, ready to face whatever came next. 5 days of testing had produced results that nobody expected. Daniel had successfully interacted with juveniles from 9 different predator species. Some took longer than others, and a few remained cautious, but none had attacked him. The scientific community across the galaxy was in chaos, with researchers arguing about what the data meant. Dr. Amy Chen sat in the research lab, surrounded by screens displaying complex biological data. She had barely slept in 3 days, too excited by what she was discovering. Greg Patterson worked beside her, running simulations and models to test their theories. They had finally found something that might explain why Daniel and the predator cubs had such an unusual connection. Look at this, Amy said, pulling up a chemical analysis on the main screen. This is the scent profile of a typical prey species when they encounter a predator. See these spike and stress hormones? And these fear pheromones? Greg leaned in to examine the data. High levels of everything associated with panic response. That's normal for prey species. Right, now look at this. Amy pulled up another analysis. This is Daniel's scent profile during his first encounter with the Draken hatchlings. His stress hormones are elevated but not spiking. His adrenaline is present but controlled. And look at the pheromone mix. Greg's eyes widened. That's not a prey response. But it's not a predator response either. What is that? That's the human variable, Amy said, unable to hide her excitement. Humans don't fit into the standard predator-prey categories that most species evolved with. We're persistence hunters from a world with relatively mild predators. We learn to stay calm during long hunts, to control our fear response, to think clearly under pressure. Lieutenant Jack Morrison entered the lab, followed by Ambassador Kreshna. The Velcron leader had been attending every research meeting, fascinated by the findings. Jack looked tired but alert, while Kreshna seemed energized by the discoveries. Tell them what you found, Greg said to Amy. Amy stood and began pacing, her hands moving as she talked. Most species in the galaxy evolved in systems where predator and prey roles were clear. Prey species developed strong fear responses that helped them escape. Predator species developed the ability to detect that fear and use it to identify food. It's a system that worked for millions of years. But humans are different, Jack said, starting to understand. Exactly. Humans are from Earth, a world where we were both hunter and hunted. We had to be smart about both roles. We learned to stay calm when being chased because panic wastes energy. We learned to work together because we weren't strong enough alone. And most importantly, we learned to bond with other species. Ambassador Kreshna tilted her head. A gesture Daniel had learned meant she was intrigued. You domesticated other predators on your world? Dogs, cats, and others. Yes, Amy continued. Humans have been forming bonds with other species for tens of thousands of years. We have instincts for it built into our psychology. When Daniel encounters a juvenile predator, he doesn't see a threat or food. He sees a young creature that might need care. Greg pulled up more data on the screens. We analyzed recordings from all the testing sessions. Watch Daniel's body language. He doesn't move like prey, which runs or freezes. He doesn't move like a predator, which stalks or attacks. He moves like something else entirely. The screens showed Daniel entering the chamber with the thornback juveniles. His movements were slow but confident. He sat down with relaxed posture but alert eyes. When the juveniles approached, he didn't flinch or flee. He simply waited and let them investigate. He moves like a parent, Krishna said softly. Like someone who expects trust, not conflict. Amy nodded enthusiastically. That's it exactly. Juvenile predators are programmed to recognize certain behaviors. Prey behavior triggers hunting instinct. Predator behavior triggers territorial aggression. But parental behavior, caretaker behavior, that's different. That's supposed to come from their own species, so they're not programmed to attack it. But Daniel isn't their species, Jack pointed out. Why do they accept him? Because he's not triggering the wrong responses, Greg explained. He's not running, not fighting, not competing. He's just being present in a calm, confident way. The juveniles don't know what to make of him. So they default to the only other major category they know. Potential caretaker. Ambassador Krishna walked closer to the screens, studying the images of Daniel with various cubs. This changes everything. Do you understand what this means for predator species? Amy and Greg exchanged glances. They had discussed this privately but hadn't yet presented it to anyone official. Amy took a breath and continued. Predator species have high infant mortality rates. Part of that is because juveniles are dangerous to each other and to adults. You have to raise them in harsh conditions to prepare them for life. But those conditions are also deadly. If humans can provide a calming influence during development, Greg added, it could reduce aggression between siblings. It could make it safer for adults to interact with their own young. It could fundamentally change how predator species raise their children. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. Jack walked to the window and looked out at the dangerous landscape of Velcros Prime. This isn't just a scientific discovery. This is political, strategic. How do you mean? Amy asked. Jack turned back to face them. Think about it. Humanity is a relatively new species on the galactic stage. We're not the strongest, not the most advanced, not the most numerous. We've been looking for our place, for what makes us valuable to the greater community. And we just found it, Greg said quietly. Maybe, Jack said, but this kind of value can be dangerous. Right now we're partners in research, but what happens when predator species realize they need humans? Do we become equals or do we become tools? Resources to be controlled? Ambassador Krishna growled softly, a sound that made everyone tense. But when she spoke, her voice was measured. Lieutenant Morrison raises a valid concern. The Velcron are warriors, but we are also honorable. If humans help raise our young, they will not be servants. They will be family. Can you speak for all predator species? Jack asked carefully. No, Krishna admitted. Some will see opportunity for exploitation. Some will see humans as weak creatures to be protected like pets. This is why we must be careful how we proceed. Daniel chose that moment to enter the lab, followed by Scar and Tyra, who had grown noticeably larger over the past week. He looked exhausted, having just finished a session with a particularly difficult species called shadow raptors. You all look serious, Daniel said, collapsing into a chair. What did I miss? Amy walked over and sat across from him. Daniel, we figured out why the cubs like you. It's not just you specifically, it's what humans represent. We're a variable that doesn't fit into the normal predator-prey system. We trigger parental acceptance responses instead of fear or aggression. Daniel processed this for a moment. So any human could do what I'm doing? In theory, yes, Greg said, though personality and approach matter. You're naturally calm and patient. Someone aggressive or fearful might not get the same results. Okay, Daniel said slowly. So what happens now? Jack sat down next to him. Now we have to make a choice as a species. The Galactic Council is going to make us an offer. I guarantee it. They're going to want humans to come to predator worlds and help raise their young. The question is, do we accept? And if we do, on what terms? Daniel looked at Scar and Tyra, who had curled up near his feet. Over the past week, he had grown genuinely attached to them. He had also worked with dozens of other cubs and felt protective of them too. The idea of walking away now felt wrong. "What do you think we should do?" Daniel asked Jack. "I think we should be very careful," Jack replied. "This could elevate humanity to a position of importance in the galaxy, but it could also trap us in a role we can't escape from. We need to make sure we're partners, not servants." Ambassador Kreshna approached Daniel and knelt down, bringing her massive head level with his. "I will support humanity's independence in this matter. You have been kind to my children. You have shown us something we did not know was possible. Whatever the Council decides, the Velcron will remember this debt." Daniel met her yellow eyes and nodded. "Thank you, Ambassador. That means a lot." Amy stood up and addressed the group. "We need to prepare a presentation for the Galactic Council. We have data, we have theories, and we have results. But we also need to have a position on what humanity wants from this discovery." "We want respect," Daniel said firmly. Everyone turned to look at him. "We want to be seen as equals, not tools. If we're going to help raise the galaxy's children, we do it as partners, as friends. Not as employees or servants," Jack smiled slightly. "That's a good starting point. Now we just have to convince several hundred alien species to see it that way." As the group began discussing strategy, Daniel felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. What had started as a simple accident had become something much larger. Humanity was about to step into a new role in the galaxy, and he was at the center of it. The Galactic Council chamber was enormous, with seating for representatives from over 300 species. Daniel had never seen so many different forms of life in one place. Some breathed oxygen like him. Others required specialized environmental suits. Some were small enough to fit in his hand. Others were massive beings that filled entire sections of the chamber. He sat in the human delegation area alongside Captain Lisa Green, Lieutenant Jack Morrison, Dr. Amy Chen, and Admiral Susan Blake, who had arrived from Earth specifically for this meeting. Ambassador Kreshna sat with the Velcron delegation, but she kept glancing in Daniel's direction, with what he had learned to recognize as encouragement. The council speaker, a tall crystalline being named Harmonix, called the session to order. The chamber fell silent, hundreds of eyes and sensors turning toward the center platform where Daniel and his team would present their findings. "We gathered today to discuss a discovery of significant importance," Harmonix announced, their voice translated into hundreds of languages simultaneously. "The human delegation will present their research on the interaction between humans and juvenile predator species." Dr. Amy Chen stepped forward first, activating holographic displays that filled the air above the platform. Charts, graphs, and video recordings appeared, showing Daniel's interactions with various predator cubs over the past 2 weeks. "Our research shows that humans occupy a unique position in the galactic ecosystem," Amy began, her voice steady despite the massive audience. "We do not trigger the standard prey response in predator species, nor do we register as competing predators. Instead, our behavioral patterns and biochemical signatures create a neutral interaction space that juvenile predators interpret as potentially parental." The holograms showed detailed breakdowns of pheromone analysis, stress responses, and behavioral observations. Several council members leaned forward with interest while others made notes on their devices. Amy continued for 20 minutes, explaining the science behind the discovery. When she finished, Greg Patterson took over to discuss the implications for predator species development and survival rates. The data they presented was undeniable. Human interaction with juvenile predators resulted in calmer behavior, reduced sibling aggression, and improved socialization. Then it was Daniel's turn. He stepped onto the platform, very aware that he was just a regular soldier standing before the most powerful governing body in the galaxy. He had prepared a speech, but looking out at all those alien faces, he decided to speak from his heart instead. "I'm not a scientist or a diplomat," Daniel began. "I'm just someone who woke up one day with 2 Velcron cubs sleeping on my chest. I didn't do anything special. I just stayed calm and let them feel safe. Over the past 2 weeks, I've spent time with juveniles from many species. Each one was different, but they all had something in common. They were young, curious, and looking for something they could trust." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I've heard some of you call this discovery valuable." "You're right, it is, but I want to make sure we're talking about the same kind of value." These cubs aren't resources. They're children. If humanity is going to help raise them, we're not doing it as a service industry. We're doing it because we care about making connections with other species. A murmur went through the chamber. Some species seemed pleased by his words, others looked confused, and a few appeared dismissive. The Kralix ambassador stood, his insectoid form clicking as he spoke. Sergeant Cooper speaks with admirable sentiment, but let us discuss practicalities. The predator species need assistance with their young. Humans can provide this assistance. Surely we can negotiate terms that benefit everyone. Admiral Susan Blake stood up in the human section. She was a stern woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. The Kralix ambassador is correct that we should discuss terms. Earth's Defense Council has reviewed this situation carefully. We see the potential for a mutually beneficial arrangement. Daniel felt his stomach drop. He didn't like the way the Admiral said arrangement. Admiral Blake continued, "We propose an exchange program. Human volunteers would be stationed on predator worlds to assist with juvenile care and socialization. In exchange, the predator species would provide military protection for human colonies, share advanced technology, and guarantee humanity's status as a protected species under galactic law." Captain Green stood up beside the Admiral, her expression concerned. "With respect, Admiral Blake, I think we should consider the long-term implications of such an arrangement. If we accept protection in exchange for our services, we risk creating a dependent relationship. Humanity would become valuable for what we provide, not for who we are." Captain Green raises a philosophical point. Admiral Blake replied coolly, "But Earth needs practical security. Aligning with the predator species offers that security." The council chamber erupted in discussion. Species argued with each other, some supporting the exchange program, others raising concerns. Daniel watched it all unfold, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. This wasn't what he wanted. This wasn't why he had agreed to work with the Cubs. Ambassador Kreshna stood, and her imposing presence brought some quiet to the chamber. "I wish to speak on behalf of the Velcran Dominion. We would welcome human assistance in raising our young, but we do not wish to create a relationship based solely on transaction. Sergeant Cooper saved my cubs from wandering into a dangerous area of your ship. He cared for them with genuine kindness. That is not something that can be bought or traded." The Thornback ambassador rose next. "The Velcrons speak with honor, but they are warriors who value such things. Other species are more practical. If humans want protection and technology, they must offer something of equal value. Their ability to calm our young is exactly such a value." Jack leaned over to Daniel and whispered, "This is getting out of control. Some of these species just see us as useful tools." Daniel nodded, watching the argument escalate. Then he made a decision. He stood up and walked back onto the central platform without being called. It was a breach of protocol, but he didn't care. "Stop," Daniel said loudly. The chamber fell silent, surprised by the interruption. "Please just stop for a moment and listen to me." Harmonix, the council speaker, tilted their crystalline head. "Sergeant Cooper, you are not recognized to speak at this time. I know, and I apologize. But this whole discussion is going in the wrong direction, and I need to say something before it goes any further." Harmonix paused, then made a gesture that Daniel interpreted as permission to continue. Daniel took a breath and addressed the entire chamber. "You're all talking about protection, technology, and trade agreements. You're treating this like a business deal, but that's not what this is about. When Scar and Tira fell asleep on my chest, they didn't do it because I could offer them technology. They did it because I made them feel safe. That's not a resource. That's a relationship." He pulled up one of the holograms showing himself sitting with a group of juvenile Thornbacks. "Look at this image. Really look at it. These are children learning to trust someone different from themselves. They're not thinking about trade agreements or military alliances. They're just being kids who found someone who treats them with kindness." The chamber was completely silent now. Every being present was focused on Daniel. "I'll work with your cubs," Daniel continued. "I'll help raise them and teach them that not everything different is dangerous. But I won't do it as part of an exchange program where humanity trades our compassion for protection. I'll do it because it's the right thing to do. Because these juveniles deserve adults who care about them, not adults who see them as part of a political deal." He turned to face Admiral Blake directly. "With all respect, Admiral, humanity doesn't need to buy our place in the galaxy by becoming professional babysitters. We should be here as equals who happen to be good at connecting with others. If predator species want our help, we should give it freely and they should respect us for it. Not as servants, not as employees, but as partners and friends. Daniel stepped back, suddenly very aware that he might have just ended his military career by contradicting an admiral in front of the Galactic Council. But he didn't regret it. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then Ambassador Kreshna began a slow, rhythmic hitting of her hand against her chest. Other Velcron joined her, creating a drumming sound that filled the chamber. It was a Velcron sign of respect. Other species began their own gestures of approval. Not all of them, but enough to matter. Captain Green was smiling. Jack looked relieved. Even Dr. Amy Chen had tears in her eyes. Admiral Blake sat down slowly, her expression unreadable. Harmonix moved to the center of the platform beside Daniel. Sergeant Cooper has reminded us of something important, the council speaker announced. We are not merely negotiating resources. We are discussing relationships between species. Perhaps we should approach this matter with that perspective in mind. The council session continued for several more hours, but the tone had shifted. Instead of talk about exchange programs and protection agreements, the discussion focused on cultural exchange, mutual respect, and building genuine connections between species. It wasn't perfect, and there were still those who saw everything through a practical lens, but Daniel had changed the direction of the conversation. 6 months had passed since Daniel's speech to the Galactic Council. The Starlight Herald had been completely redesigned and renamed the Haven. The ship was now twice its original size, with specialized habitats for different species and advanced life support systems that could accommodate dozens of different environmental needs. Daniel stood in the main nursery, watching the morning feeding time. 20 juvenile predators from 12 different species moved around the large space. Some played together despite being from different worlds. Others rested in their designated areas. Human volunteers moved among them, calm and confident, providing care and supervision. Sarah Kim, one of the newest volunteers, approached a nervous thornback juvenile named Spike. She had only been on the Haven for 2 weeks but had already proven to be naturally gifted at working with the cubs. She sat down near Spike and simply waited, letting the young predator come to her in his own time. Daniel smiled watching her work. The volunteer program had attracted hundreds of applicants from Earth. People who wanted to be part of something bigger, who saw the opportunity to build bridges between humanity and other species. After careful psychological screening and training, 50 had been selected for the Haven's first mission. Chief Cooper, you have a visitor, came a voice over his communicator. Daniel still wasn't used to his new title. Chief Interspecies Relations Officer was quite a jump from Sergeant. He made his way to the observation deck where Captain Lisa Green waited with a Velcron he didn't recognize. The visitor was smaller than Ambassador Kreshna, with darker coloring and younger features. Daniel, this is Commander Shorak, Captain Green said. He represents a colony world that wants to participate in our program. Shorak bowed slightly, a sign of respect. Chief Cooper, I have heard much about your work. My world has high cub mortality rates, and our elders believe human assistance could help. But we are cautious. We want to understand what this relationship truly means. Daniel gestured for them to sit at a nearby table. What do you want to know? Are humans truly here as equals? Shorak asked directly. Or do you expect us to provide technology and protection in exchange for your services? Daniel appreciated the honesty. We're here because we believe in what we're doing. Yes, we hope to build good relationships with predator species. Yes, we hope those relationships lead to friendship and mutual support. But we're not going to hold your cubs hostage for trade deals. Shorak seemed surprised by the bluntness. That is refreshing. Many species in the galaxy see everything as transaction. Humans can be transactional too, Captain Green added. But this program was built on a different foundation. We genuinely want to help. They talked for another hour, discussing logistics, concerns, and expectations. By the end, Shorak had agreed to send 6 cubs to the Haven for a trial period. If things went well, his colony world would establish a permanent exchange program, with human volunteers rotating through their facilities. After Shorak left, Captain Green turned to Daniel. That went well. We're up to 15 worlds now participating in the program. 16 if you count the Kralix colony that just sent their request, Daniel said. Though I'm still not sure about working with insectoid species. Their juveniles are very different from mammalian predators. That's why we test carefully, the captain replied. Speaking of which, how's our problem child doing? Daniel's expression grew more serious. Razor is still struggling. He lets me sit near him now, but he won't allow physical contact. The trauma from losing his birth pack runs deep. They walked together toward the specialized isolation habitat where Razor lived. The thornback juvenile was larger than when he first arrived, his ridged back more pronounced and his coloring darker. He lay in the corner of his habitat watching them approach with wary eyes. I've been sleeping in here 3 nights a week, Daniel explained quietly. Just being present, not pushing, not demanding anything, letting him get used to me. That's a lot of patience, Captain Green observed. He needs it. He watched his entire family die. He associates creatures that look vaguely like humans with that trauma. We can't rush this. Daniel entered the habitat alone, as he had done dozens of times before. He sat down against the far wall, pulling out a tablet to read reports. This was his routine with Razor. He would enter, sit in the same spot, and go about his business as if the juvenile wasn't there. No pressure, no expectations. Razor watched him from across the habitat. The juvenile's breathing was quick, a sign of stress. But he didn't retreat to his den like he used to. That was progress. Daniel read his reports for an hour. Then, because he had been up late with a sick Draken hatchling, he found himself getting drowsy. He set the tablet aside and closed his eyes, just for a moment. He woke up to the feeling of warm breath on his face. His eyes opened slowly and he found himself looking directly at Razor. The thornback juvenile was less than a foot away, his large eyes studying Daniel's face. Every instinct told Daniel to stay completely still. "Hey there, buddy," Daniel whispered softly. "You came over to investigate?" Razor made a low sound in his throat. Not quite a growl, but not friendly either. Daniel kept his breathing slow and even, maintaining eye contact but keeping his expression soft. "I know I'm scary," Daniel continued in a quiet voice. "I look like the things that hurt your family, but I'm not them. I'm just here to be your friend, if you'll let me." Razor moved his head closer, sniffing Daniel's shoulder. Then, in a movement, so quick Daniel barely saw it, the juvenile pressed his ridged head against Daniel's chest and stayed there. It was brief, maybe 3 seconds, but it was deliberate contact. Then Razor retreated to his den, curling up with his back to Daniel. But something had shifted. The barrier had cracked. Daniel left the habitat carefully and found Captain Green still waiting outside. "He touched me," Daniel said, unable to hide his emotion. "Just for a second, but he did it on purpose." The captain smiled. "That's wonderful, Daniel. Really wonderful. You've been working so hard with him." "He's been working hard too," Daniel replied. That took incredible courage from him, to approach something that terrifies him because some part of him knows he needs connection. They walked back toward the main nursery together. Through the observation windows, they could see the daily activities continuing. Sarah had successfully coaxed Spike into playing with a Draken hatchling. Another volunteer, Peter Wong, was teaching 3 Velcron cubs a new game that involved gentle competition without aggression. "Sometimes I can't believe this is real," Daniel admitted. 6 months ago I was just running security patrols. Now I'm chief of a program that's changing how species interact across the galaxy. "It is remarkable," Captain Green agreed. "But there are still challenges ahead. Not everyone is happy about humanity's new role. The council session last week had some species raising concerns about human influence over predator young. They think we're trying to make them less dangerous," Daniel said. It wasn't a question. He had heard the criticism before. Some do. They worry that human-raised cubs will be weak, too social, not aggressive enough for survival. Daniel looked back at the nursery, at the cubs playing and learning together. They won't be weak. They'll be balanced. There's a difference between being capable of violence and being driven by it. These cubs will grow up knowing how to work with others, how to control their instincts, how to form connections across species. That's not weakness. That's strength. An alarm chimed softly on the captain's communicator. She checked it and frowned. "We have an incoming ship, unscheduled. They're requesting permission to dock." They hurried to the bridge where Lieutenant Jack Morrison was already reviewing the incoming vessel's credentials. "It's a Kralix diplomatic ship," Jack reported. "They have Ambassador Crixtal aboard. He says it's urgent." "Let them dock," Captain Green ordered, "but maintain security protocols." 20 minutes later, Ambassador Crixtal stood in the conference room. The insectoid being's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation. "We have a crisis on my home world. A clutch of 30 juveniles has become unmanageable. They have killed 3 handlers and injured a dozen others. Our scientists cannot calm them. We request human assistance immediately." Daniel exchanged glances with Jack and the captain. 30 juveniles in an aggressive state is extremely dangerous, Daniel said. "What caused the change in behavior?" "We do not know," Crixtal admitted. "They were developing normally, then suddenly became violent. We have them contained, but we cannot keep them sedated indefinitely. They need intervention or they will have to be terminated." The word terminated hit Daniel hard. "You would kill them?" "We cannot release aggressive juveniles into the population," Crixtal said, his voice heavy with regret. "It would endanger everyone. But if there is any chance humans can help them, we must try." Captain Green looked at Daniel. "This would be dangerous, very dangerous. We're talking about 30 aggressive Kralix juveniles. Even with our training, that's a huge risk." Daniel thought about Razor, about the courage it took for that traumatized cub to reach out despite his fear. He thought about all the cubs sleeping peacefully in the nursery, because humans had shown them a different way to exist. "We have to try," Daniel said firmly. "If we don't, 30 young lives end. That's not acceptable." Jack shook his head, but he